Unconventional Soldier, a military podcast brought to you by two British Army veterans in association with ISAR.com.
Thanks for downloading the second part of this podcast with Adam Lyle Stirling. We continue to discuss his tour of Afghanistan in 2010 with One Royal Irish, and Adam follows on from where we left in part 1. And as usual, we'll finish off with Desert Island Dits, which is his choice of book, film and luxury item.
The company commander came up with an idea of getting everybody down near Shingle, Calais, having a larger element of us in Shingle and in other compounds hidden, but sending out a patrol to get engagement with the enemy, almost like a come-on, but then having us launch into depth to cut them off and hopefully snap ambushes and that kind of thing. And we did that multiple times as a company on the ground. Each time we went out, it was an all-day engagement that saw us covering a lot of ground, clearing a lot of compounds. One day I think we killed 15 Taliban.
Did you feel at this point in the tour that you had combat experience now? You were bedded in.
Yeah.
You were gaining more confidence. Were you getting a better feel for what the enemy were doing?
In the first week or so, I very much was trying to find my feet. For me personally, as a commander, as a sergeant level in charge of a multiple, dealing with asset support, company headquarters, it's a weight on your shoulders, and it's easy to do on the training area, but when you're doing it and you're getting engaged 4 to 5 times a day on the ground, or in, that comes into play, and it affects you mentally a bit and your decision making, and it takes a while, but then there becomes a point where you absolutely accept it for what it is, the situation. I know this sounds very cheesy, but you accept the fact almost that you might not get out of it. And when you become at peace with that situation, you then start to operate at a higher level. And I found that when so much happened in the first couple of weeks that I thought, we're here for 6 months. Every day I see the sun come up's a blessing. So do you know what? Let's just get on with the job at hand. And as soon as I sort of had made that personal contract with myself, I started to operate same as I did back on Senior Brecon. I just moved around the ground. I grabbed the guys. I made effective decisions on the battlefield. We did our job, and we did it very well. And I think the one thing with the company commander that he did is he certainly knew his senior NCOs, and he utilised us as the forward elements in any battle. Northern Ireland experience, Iraq experience, conflict, Afghanistan multiple times before. They've got a wealth of experience that just can't be matched when it comes to leading, planning, being out. They bring all of that operational experience to their decision making on the battlefield. They're definitely the first decision.
A really unenviable position for a young platoon commander fresh out of Sandhurst.
Yeah. I kind of took him under my wing. I didn't have one initially, but in the second phase I did, and he openly came to me and said, right, I want to spend some time with you. And we spent a lot of time in the ops room talking about how I do things on the ground and things like that. And he appreciated that, and that helped him to become more competent and confident in his position. And I think for him as well, it's a big burden of responsibility to go out on the ground as a 22-year-old man with 12 guys and face a fighting force, especially when been on the radio and listened to the engagements and how heavy the fighting is and what is required of you in an omnidirectional battle situation, to be very flexible and have ability to put out your flank protection, focus on fire support, think about breaking down into 2 halves, how are you going to assault that compound because you can't go backwards. And it's a very fast flowing situation, and you need to be aware, consciously aware that you're of yourself in that environment and not lose yourself to the panic. First contact I had, I was very much it was a bit of a flat spin for me, to be honest, like it is for everybody. It's a shock, there's adrenaline, you're trying to make decisions, but you're kind of like, what the hell is going on? There's that. It takes a few to get into your flow and really start to be like, right, that's it now, just do the job like you would anywhere else. And as it will for any young platoon commander coming in as well.
I mean, in your platoon as well, you got experience NCOs as well.
Oh, definitely.
Your full screws, again, probably just as experienced.
But the Royal Irish, for sure. The artillery acts as well, probably second, third tour. So the mortar fire controllers as well, who probably worked on the mortar line as rangers, first tour, second tour, 2 ICs, third tour going out as a mortar fire controller. So they knew the whole pipeline, no pun intended, of the mortar platoon and how it operated by the time they went out on the ground. And that regiment doing 3 tours of Afghan and Iraq as well, very kinetic tours. They've experienced, battle hardened, I would say. And that
showed as experienced as anyone else now in the British Army.
For sure, definitely. Yeah, we started doing kinetic operations, pushing out, as we said, sending decoy patrols out. There's a couple of things we picked up on. I started to identify an area that was known on the map as Echo 10. And Echo 10 was a very large junction, central in the Red Wedge. And I sort of looked at the map and I said, if that's me, if I'm them, the Purit's the fan, I'm going to rendezvous somewhere. Where am I going to do it? I just thought, I'd chance my arm. looked at the map. It's going to be there. It's massive. Like, everyone knows it. I would say to the guys, everyone knows this piece of ground. If you lose the patrol, poo it's the fan. Get yourself back here. You'll meet somebody. You get together and get back to company headquarters or the Galabad Calais. So we went out on an up, and there was a massive ambush, and I was on flank protection up by the main MSR, and the company commander said to me, launch into depth, get into an area, identify where the enemy are. We had sort of most of the company plus attachments and elements from machine gun platoon and stuff there engaged, but we also knew that they would start to move northeast. So I moved very quickly, probably the bones of about 800-900 meters in a short amount of time. Went to the front of the patrol and picked an unobvious route and just proceeded to sprint as fast as I could. And we got to a point where I was like, almost could see that junction. Sure as eggs are eggs, who started coming across over the ground, carrying their machine guns, carrying their RPGs. I saw them 300 meters away, and I was like, I knew it. So, but they sort of saw us at the same time, so you could see them. I was trying to get my guys to fan out, and they were all knackered because they just ran 900 meters carrying all the kit. And I just looked over, and I could see them kind of like looking, glaring a bit. I couldn't really see their faces, but they were like, "What the hell is that? Really?" Like, there was probably that element of disbelief in their heads that they just bumped into a patrol, and they started to open up on us as we opened up on them at the same time. But they put on they put on a good show, and they put a heavy weight of fire down on us as we did them. And then the company kind of swung round and up in the same moment eventually, and we started to push north. As we were patrolling north, and because that engagement has stopped, we started to patrol north, and basically one of my LMG gunners dropped to the right and opened fire because he'd seen Taliban sort of come into an irrigation ditch and bed himself in with a machine gun. But as we sort of swung and were about to engage, a Apache helicopter over our top right shoulder let rip with the machine gun and just tore him to shreds. Basically, he was dead instantly, and we moved round and cleared through that position just to get through and identify it and sort of rejig ourselves, or regroup, and then prepare to move on to the next one. We had platoons to the left and right as well, and we were sort of moving. It was kind of like Northern Ireland tactics. We would go and get engaged, and the left or right platoons would just launch into depth. Because if you go to the compound, you're going to come on an IED. Chances are it's a common normally, so they want you to go to the door, you'll tread on the pressure plate, bang, and there goes your legs, kind of thing. But we knew that they were starting to extract out the back of those compounds into depth, so we just started to launch into depth to cut them off, and it essentially started working, those tactics.
Well, it's funny you mentioned, sorry to interrupt, Adam, it's funny you mentioned about that crossroads, because we interviewed on a podcast a couple of weeks ago a guy called John Tulloch, who was an FO in Vietnam, and he more or less described what you described there about that crossroads. They were talking about putting ambushes in, and he would look at that, and they'd know there's a track junction, and he'd call in artillery fire on it because he knew obvious RP point going.
And sure as eggs are eggs, they do it. I said in a brief, I started to identify extraction points, but purely because of the amount of ambushes we'd been in. And the engagements we'd had, we started to get used to their pattern of movement. And I remember being in a brief, we got took back to company headquarters to meet up with support company who were going to do an op in our area. And they said, "What's your analysis of them?" And I said, essentially, they're creatures of habit, almost as battlefield individuals stupid, because they're using the same routes all the time. The company commander's like, I wouldn't say they're stupid necessarily, and I'd say, okay, they're overconfident, and they're definitely at a point of overconfidence. If we now start to do ops on the area, we're going to catch them out. But support company came and did like a brigade recce force style op where they just flooded the ground, and the Taliban just took one look and went, there's like 90 guys on the ground, there's absolutely no point in thinking about taking them on, let's just go home, chill out for the day. And then obviously they left, we start patrolling again, and guess what, back into the heavy combat. So as a company, we did a lot of ops, and there was like this MSR to the north of the Red Wedge, just near that Galabad Calais, where I said I got ambushed to help out with that ID issue. That was kind of the enemy's do not cross point, and it became very apparent because we fought up through the Red Wedge one particular day, and I remember there was a forward platoon in a compound on a junction just southeast of the Galabad Calais by about 300 meters on a cross junction of that MSR. The MSR moved from northwest to southeast, and there was another platoon moving up to the right to get on the line, and there was me sort of southwest moving as quick as I could to get up there, and we got engaged, but all three platoons got engaged, company headquarters and support reserve platoons in the rear as well, because I think we went out like 5 platoons on that particular patrol with attachments, etc., Apaches, whatever, attached as well. And that was a massive engagement, and they managed to stop an entire rifle company on the ground from pushing 1 inch any further forward. Something was said on the ICOM. The interpreter said that the guy basically said, don't let them come near the village. And they deployed. You could see at one point when I was up on the wall, you could see people running with no weapons to compounds, like just loads. And they were obviously then getting into those compounds and picking up weapons from stashes and engaging us. And it became this, they formed a kind of a bull's horn situation. So the village was the head, and you had a bullhorn going from there out to the southeast and one out to the kind of northwest pincer kind of thing. And they completely pinned us down. The patrol commander in that central platoon got hit by an underslung grenade in close proximity. He became a casualty. One of my full screws was up on the wall given a fire control order, and he got hit and knocked out by an RPG. We had to sort of engage them until near sunset basically before we could make a decision to move, but because it was just it wouldn't have been safe to either extract or move forward. There was that much enemy fire coming in, and they were certainly trying to outflank us at all stages as well. And we put machine gunners on our roofs, etc., to suppress any attempt to flank. And we were becoming very dangerously low on ammunition at this stage as well. And then I also had a casualty that I needed to extract somehow, and we had the casualty in the central platoon that needed to get extracted, and we moved them to a free para platoon house, which was just west of where we were by about half a kilometre essentially. And very handily and very politely, the guys in that platoon house established a HLS, passed the guys over to them, they got them extracted, and then we went in, and the guys watered, brewed and fed us as well and looked after us for an hour while we sort of recocked before we went out. Good boys, Paras. Yeah, and then we kind of slowly extracted ourselves back to our platoon houses as a company and company headquarters back through that day. And we carried out a series of operations like this over the coming weeks, and eventually what happened was Italian commander decided from where I was southeast on that route. So there's I said the north to south route and then the east to west. That west part from my compound goes slightly southeast. So what they decided was to put a compound in there, and then east of that in the next town there was another platoon in there. So that kind of linked that up, and that essentially became the end of the Red Wedge and the combat in that area. That it dulled it down completely, and as a company we got kind of split up and we got sent to a new AO further south of us, half of us, and into there, and it became then about a similar situation to what we'd experienced there, dominating the ground, going out on patrols, getting engaged, doing company ops, clearing the area, that kind of thing, and then establishing more platoon houses. And the aim of the tour was to have enough platoon houses or section houses spread out around the AO that the Taliban would have no freedom of action in terms of movement. It disenabled their ability to conduct proper effective operations, and then that also allowed the local populace to be able to start to get some resemblance of normality about, to start to farm again, to start to open up the village shops and stuff, to start to get the schools kind of back up and running and things. And we started to see a little bit of normality happening around us, which was quite nice. And
did you see the sort of the situation calming down a little bit because you're dominating the ground more?
Definitely, yeah. There was still the odd engagements and stuff, but in comparison to the 3 months of heavy combat, it was nothing like that. The best part was, I think for me personally, on Christmas Day in the compound, the family from the compound before they came over with some turkeys and stuff, and we cooked and we had Christmas dinner together and stuff like that, and with the A&A and the families from around us immediate, and they kind of came and thanked us. They knew it was Christmas, and they made a special effort to come and thank us for everything we'd done. Something with what happened recently, there's something that kind of been on my mind a lot, and it's the recent events in Afghanistan and the way we left. And I know everybody, the focal point for the media was on Kabul, because it was where the extraction was. But my mind was more with the people that we left in the villages and the Calais that sided with us, that will definitely be targets, would have been, they won't be around anymore. They've definitely had repercussions taken against them, and that's something that's become very hard for me to come to terms with as a person, because I made the promises and assurances based on what I was told as a commander would be done for them in the ongoing future, and this is for your country, and please work for us, and don't support the Taliban. And essentially unbeknowingly lied to them and then left them in that situation. And we all know what the Taliban are like and what's probably happened to them. And unfortunately, it's been known to me that kids in our immediate area have been killed, and teachers from schools have been taken out of buildings hundreds of meters down the road from me. We couldn't do nothing about it, and shot and executed just for wanting to teach kids and stuff. And that really gave me the strength when I was on tour of why I was there and what we were going to enable these people to do and what we were fighting. And then for that to be suddenly taken away, and what their fate is or probably was, and also the loss associated to it. My best friend took his life in 2018. He was in the Special Forces for a number of reasons, but and guys, I know multiple guys that aren't here anymore. I'm sure you guys do from service and previous tours, and the toll that it takes on them, and the toll that it takes on the people in the countries that you do these operations on, and what happens after and later. And on a political level, it's very much what's good for the government now, what, in my opinion, what generates votes, what keeps people in power, what they think the public want. That decision by the US president was made with such haste, in my opinion, to extract everyone off the ground after just coming in and not thinking about the 20 years of investment before. But if you look at South Korea, sorry, not Korea. If you look at Korea as an example, of real investment and energy spent on a country to get it back, and it took a lot of decades, but look at it now.
It took decades for Germany post-World War.
That's right, 40 years, and Korea's been over 50 years of maintaining a force, because if you don't...
And the force in Afghanistan wasn't that big.
Yeah, because Herrick obviously finished in 14, and then obviously we moved to Toril in 15 onwards, and it was centred around Kabul with only a few thousand Americans, only a few thousand Europeans, including the British. It wasn't a massive amount of resource. Every time I went out there, it was quite small. There was a few camps and stuff, but they hadn't taken a casualty for over 2 years in the Kabul area. So we could have carried on, even though the Americans may not wanted to. I was always disappointed that probably the Europeans could have filled the gap.
Every decision's made, especially on a presidential level, based on what their team analysed to be what the public will want most, and it's not necessarily what's best for that region. And I think, as we've all given great examples of successful situations, there was probably another 20 years minimum to be invested there.
Easy.
Yeah.
Well, 2012, we came out of Iraq. 2015, we started going back into Iraq. There are now still troops, trainers, and all the investments in the Middle East to support the Iraqi
I remember having a conversation with some guys I knew, and I got out of the army, and we're talking about Northern Ireland, and I said, I can't remember this was 2013. I said, in 5-6 years' time, nobody will give a toss about Afghanistan. You'll all be forgotten about it.
Yeah.
We've seen it happen in my experience in Northern Ireland. Yeah. But at least for Northern Ireland veterans, there is a semblance of what we did paid off. It might not be perfect. I never got at ease with it until I went back to Northern Ireland in 2010 as a civvy, walked round, and it was far, far better. But I just feel for Afghan veterans like yourself, Adam, it must be a real kick in the teeth.
It's that's your legacy, as a soldier. The mainstay of your time in the military was invested in Middle East operations. And I think we can say that both of them were probably a failure. The failures predominantly were created by political decisions that were made very wrongly. Yeah. And
it's never going to be a military failure, because the military, unfortunately, you pulled out when the politicians think it's sorted, instead of actually, like you say, Korea.
Well, there becomes a way you can accept it if there's an ongoing operation out there, and to stabilize it, and okay, fine, we'll invest trillions over the next 20 years, but further. But if that stabilizes it, then it's worth it from my perspective. If you're a family member of somebody you've lost, you might not ever see it as being worth it. But for us soldiers who went through it, who lost friends, we can be at peace with it, I think.
These things are long-term and very expensive investments.
Yeah.
But to change a country that's been at war since the Soviet invasion, which is now 40-odd years ago.
Yeah.
You need to find generations to change the attitude.
Well, it takes generations, right?
Yeah, it does, massively.
So, Adam, you've described very well there the combat experiences you had, the delivering of effects on the enemy. Did you ever come into contact physically after the end of battle phase? Did you ever have any prisoners or see enemy dead?
We did. So there was one operation where essentially we had a local civvy come into Mazroof a few times, young lad who kept talking about a compound to just the northeast of PB Pimin, and he was saying Arab, and call sign Arab was the commander of the Taliban in our immediate area of operations that was focused on their operations against my platoon, the platoon from Shingle, and then the company defense of the company operations we were putting into place. So he was, for me and everyone, he was a target, a person of particular interest that we definitely wanted to catch up with at some point. I passed the information on a couple of times to company headquarters, didn't hear anything back for a while, and then suddenly I was told to come into company. I was taken into company headquarters and briefed by the OC that this intelligence pack had been confirmed, and this individual was living in this compound with his family. He was call sign Arab. Essentially, we were going to do a company up, and because of everything that happened, I would be the door kicking platoon, and would have responsibility for capturing this individual. But with that immediate capture would be led by the MDS, which was the special police, and then the normal police as well that would come with me, and I would just be there to kick the door in and have immediate oversight, but I would have the satisfaction of that moment, which was great. So we basically planned the company up. We all led from PB Piven in the middle of the night, about 4 a.m. I led. There was no stars, so I had to do the standard navigation with a handheld compass, which was quite interesting. Walked about 300 meters across the desert. Couldn't see anything, but all you could hear, when all you could hear is just aggressive dogs barking. And I just looked down at my compass thing and thought, just don't move it. I fell over about 20 times in ditches and stuff. Smashed my knees in. We finally reached the corner of this first compound of the village and sort of handrailed them down. The company then moved out and put like an ops box. So guys, an ops box is having depth in 360 further out from your area of focus, so that if anything happens, they can maintain defense. And yeah, we went in. The second room we went in, we found Arab, confirmed it was him. Obviously, the two guys. I was the first guy through the door, and then I called the two police guys and sent them in, and they grabbed him, confirmed it was him, arrested him, took him out. And an indicator that we knew it was him was we started to take heavy engagement from the northeast and the north, people that had come to try and help him out, but it was too late at that stage. We extracted him back on foot to PB Pimin. Whole company collapsed in, and yeah, I spent a couple of minutes with him actually, with the interpreter, and he's just a normal person, but an Afghan. He asked me, he said, kill me, basically, because he was more concerned about what was going to happen to him when he was in the hands of the MDS and the Afghan police. Obviously, I refused. I gave him a cigarette. I had one myself. And he kind of said a couple of things to me, just that he had a family and this is his life and all that kind of thing. He kept saying, this is my life. So I think what he was trying to say to me is that he had to take this path to fight us. I think he believed it. You could tell it was definitely a deep-rooted belief within him, but he wasn't angry to me or nasty or didn't say anything negative to me. There was a mutual respect there. I kind of respected him, I think, because of everything he coordinated was quite intense. And then when I finally came across this guy who was living in a compound, running around in flip-flops, he didn't look like
this was
much.
The guy that when you're describing the ambushes and the contacts earlier, you reckon this is the guy that had been planning them?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was call sign Arab. It was confirmed. He confirmed it. We heard him speaking on the icon a few times as Arab. There's a couple of other guys' names I can't remember now that were low-level section commanders, but he was more like the platoon commander, let's say. And then when you actually meet him and you see the raggedy-boned individual that he is in Afghan clothing, and you think, wow, like this guy coordinated all that against the rifle company. I was like, that's pretty impressive if you think about it.
Yeah,
for sure. The other time, so there's one about the effect of making decisions, I would say, is when we were given, you could get, but rules of engagement can get changed, right, dependent on the situation of a offensive operation, and we were given warfighting rules during certain times. And one situation was that we came across an MFC who was actually stood coordinating where we were on a phone, blazing in the middle of the road, and the company headquarters came on the net to me, and I identified him, and they said, basically, in no uncertain terms, get one of you guys to clip him. And I kind of froze for a minute, and I was like, right, but they said, rules of engagement, do it. So I said to Dean, one of the guys, I said, that's MFC, I said, take him out. Dean never did it. And I said to him about 3 or 4 times, and he didn't do it. But the guy ran off in the end, threw the phone on the floor and ran off. That might have been a decision. That might have been the moment that made him decide, I'm not doing that again or whatever, I don't know. But I think it's one of those, for Dean in particular, I think it was probably one of those moments where he thought, is this the right decision? Do you know what I mean? Especially when you're not being shot at by him. He might be on a phone, he might be coordinating mortars or whatever, but there's a personal moment, I think, always when you're about to pull the trigger on an individual. And I think it's a lot easier done. Yeah, I mean, it is a lot easier done when they're shooting at you, or they're part of an attack against you, than it is to do a freestanding individual that's not carrying out an immediate offensive action against you as you see it.
You're not seeing him as a combatant, are you?
No, and that the human emotional side takes over, where you become emotionally conscious of what you're doing, and it starts to become a worrying situation. And I think Dean made the right decision for himself. I think it would have affected him a lot differently later if he'd have pulled the trigger.
It's probably fair to say as well that in an engagement, you're shooting at abstracts sometimes. You maybe see weapon signatures, you maybe snap shooting at a fleeting figure, but to have somebody stood in front of you, I've not been in that situation, but I could imagine that's a lot more difficult than snap shooting or
I think so.
taking pot shots at a building or whatever.
Definitely. And I think the other thing is dead bodies for young guys, first time. A couple of my guys, we closed round a position. They kind of, one of them in particular, the big South African rugby playing GPMG guy, the toughest guy you've ever met, but first time he's seen a dead body. And he was very taken back by it. And I could see everybody was doing their jobs. And I was trying to coordinate with the company headquarters on the radio. And I just kind of half looked at him and I realised that he was lost in a trance staring at this guy, and I think he was trying to come to terms with it. And I just made a casual moment of it. I said, do you want a picture? And he said, what? I said, do you want a picture? I tried to make a joke to snap him out of it, and he went, no, Sergeant. I said, right, have a look at him, forget about him, face your arcs, get on with your job, mate. And he went, all right, no problem, like that. So there's that as well. You remember the faces of people that have died, especially enemy combatants. It's something that sticks in your head. And for me personally, it's the face of the dead person. It's who's been shot and frozen in position. It's kind of it's not the greatest thing to remember, but it's certainly something that I will never forget. There's that side of things as well for me. And the civilian casualties is something that's very hard to manage. And the worst thing for me, I'd say, in terms of Afghans, is when an enemy combatant was somewhere in our midst, but we couldn't find him, and he was screaming in agony, and it was in the middle of a battle, and you could hear him dying slowly. And that for me was probably the most harrowing thing I've ever heard in my entire life, and it really sticks with you forever. That's something that you can't ever forget. Someone dying in agony and you can't get to them, and even if they're combatant, it doesn't matter. That goes out the window once they're out of the battle. It's about saving life, straight away. We couldn't PID where he was, and he went very quiet after a few minutes. But that's my perspective and all of that.
And obviously that would feed into the sort of the issues that soldiers have got to deal with on their return from Afghanistan. And we talked earlier on offline, Adam, about sort of PTSD, and you visited some casualties when you were on R&R. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I visited Aaron, the guy who I referenced in one of the earliest stories that got shot. When he had to cover for Point Man on the patrol for the other guys, body armor had been hit, and he was actually quite good spirits, which was odd. We visited him in Birmingham with an ex-partner. Went down when I was on R&R. It was strange to see him in that environment. He was more wanting to know how the guys were, what was going on. He asked about his kit. First thing he said was, "Where's my kit? Has anyone been in it?" And I was like, no. It got sent back straight away, and he's like, if I find out anyone's robbed any of my stuff, I'm going to batter him. And that was kind of it, which was good to see. He was still very positive. Aaron is he's on a walking stick for life. He's got some very severe injuries. Unfortunately, he got some blood poisoning from the water in the canal that's affected him ongoing. He'd never be able to really do a proper full-on job ever for the rest of his life, and he was only, I think, 19 when he got shot. So there's that. And I think the other thing is PTSD. Andy suffered silently with PTSD, and one thing I wasn't overly conscious of, I think, early in the tour is, and I think about it now, and I think about how they were on the first patrols and their body language and how rigid and sort of nervous they kind of looked and acted. And when something happened in the distance that wasn't in our immediate area, it kind of, people were jolty and stuff. You could tell the first few patrols, and I didn't really think about the mental effects of that. You don't, the psychological issues that then comes with all the combat and stuff that happens. And then suddenly, especially these guys who were TA attachments to us, they go back to their civilian lives straight after, pretty much. They're not in the unit continually being around.
They lose that support network, don't they?
Yeah, and Andy, he posted something on Facebook about not being able to live with the nightmares anymore and stuff. And then that next morning, unfortunately, his family found him. He took his own life. So I think I myself was diagnosed with PTSD. When I left the army, one about this, and I think a lot of guys probably left after heavy combat tours is you become detached mentally and you become disinterested in the job. And for me, I was probably one of the keenest guys I'd ever met. I loved the army. I was all about fitness. I wanted to do selection. I threw myself into courses. I did P company on my leave. I was like on leave. I had 6 weeks off. I went to the divisional captain, said, I'm bored. He said, the only course there is P company. I said, I'll do it. And that was on a Friday. I turned up Monday and did P company just so I didn't have to sit at home and watch telly. I was that kind of individual. And then I just became completely detached from discipline. I lost my sense of self-discipline.
Is that because, you've been in combat to that level? I mean, where else is there for a professional soldier to go?
There's that, yeah. And I think there was also a new OC who came in with new ambition and stuff. It's very hard, I think, for a new company commander to come into a company that's just come back for being on kinetic operations. And he had a new way of looking at things, and he didn't treat the company in the best light, definitely not. And there was guys that wanted to go off and join Pathfinder platoon and other things, and I watched moments where he just said, you're not going, we're keeping you in the rifle company, I need to keep my numbers up and stuff. And they left and got out of the army anyway, and he didn't bat an eyelid to it because he was dealing with his stepping stone of his career, of how he wanted to advance, and nothing was getting in the way. And that kind of attitude really destroyed the company, I think. And in that moment, with guys like me and other guys within the company already having the early stages of PTSD, not communicating with each other, then having that extra impact thrown on top of you when you're already starting to lose your discipline and become detached emotionally from your partners at home and also the job, it just compounds things. Extra stress just makes you rebel. And
sorry, Aaron, what would your advice be to any veteran who's struggling out there at this time with PTSD?
For me, it's become aware that you're not alone, that you're not the only one going through it, and not to be embarrassed by it, and to first talk to somebody, a friend, and really start to explain how you're feeling. And you'll find for sure that there's other people, and probably some of your friends that you served with as well, that feel exactly the same. And once you cross that bridge and you get yourself to that point, then you develop hope within yourself, because there becomes a period where people lose hope, especially people with PTSD that are suffering alone. And a lot of ex-soldiers don't stay in touch with each other, even though they've still got Facebook, Instagram, probably got phone numbers, and they don't pick up the phone and call each other. And one conscious thing that me and a lot of my friends have done in the last sort of couple of years is we've started to make a conscious effort to call each other, see each other. We actually set up a WhatsApp group for my unit where there's quite a lot of us in, and things, sometimes guys go in there and they've got issues or problems, but we all club together. We've put money to help people get places to stay. We've put money together for families of people that have become casualties who were out on operations as part of a close protection private company and stuff. And I think things like that, you can actively engage at the lower level with your old friends in the army and start to get that a little bit of that social life back. And when you meet up with those guys and you have those beers, that's when you can express yourself like you used to, but start to talk about how you feel. And when you start to talk about how you feel, that's when you it's the beginnings of a road to getting yourself back, I think.
It's funny you should say that, because it's very similar to the conversation Kev and I had with Neil Hogg on the Northern Ireland episode. Neil left the army and for years and years struggled with PTSD.
Yeah.
Then he got help one day from a guy who had trained in treating PTSD but was a veteran as well. And Neil said that was when his journey started really in addressing his PTSD, because he could identify with what this veteran was saying. Everybody else was a civilian, didn't have a clue what he was going through.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something you do silently, even when you're in recovery, and you've had endless therapy. It's something you still deal with silently. You don't try to burden people. You feel that you can manage it yourself. And that's something even later with dealing with PTSD and having gone through the Veterans Complex Treatment Service and being in advanced therapy over time that I did, you still have this military mindset of I can manage it myself, don't burden people, I don't need to talk to my partner about it. There's always going to be that element, unfortunately, because we just are the way we are. You can't break it. You can definitely, there's Veterans Complex Treatment Service which has been put together by the NHS, which actually it's a specialist group that has got locations all over the UK that you can actually go to your GP, express what the issues are, and go through a process of ending up with them. And they are put together purely for veterans that have got post-traumatic stress from tours and operations. And it's definitely a lifesaver. And for me personally, from where I was at a few years ago when I had PTSD to where I am now, I've got my ambition back. I've got a great career. I work for a great company. My family's happy. I've got 2 kids. I'm getting married in 2 years. All of that's come into place. I'm very happy in myself and with my life. But it's taken me to go through those steps to get that help, to go along that journey, to get back to this point of where I was before combat operations. And I'm a better person for it as well. So yeah, that's my advice to people, is to your friends first, but also there is a service there that can help if you go to your GP, and it does work.
Defence has got better at it, because when I left Defence 2015, there'd been a lot of inroads, movement, because also a lot of people don't realise is that some of the defence civilians have been on operations as well.
Yeah.
And one of my team members had to go through combat stress, and I know at least 2 or 3 now that have gone through from their experiences in Iraq and then later in Afghanistan. That piece, it's not just the servicemen, it was the people working with the servicemen.
How is, from your perspective, knowing them, how have you seen them now in comparison to what they were like?
I'm not in touch with them anymore because I've moved into a different line of work.
Yeah.
But the guy that went through the first part, he came out, he understood then what his problems were. Because you have to live with it. You don't cure it.
Yeah.
He has to find out how to live with it.
Yeah,
and he was struggling with that, and he had to go back for more sessions.
You have to find a way to
deal with it,
accept what you did, and be comfortable with it, that your decisions that you made, and also, be comfortable talking about it. That was the biggest problem for all of us, especially as men anyway, and women as well, that serve medics and stuff.
No, absolutely.
But being a military person, and that I can manage, I'm strong-minded, I'm strong-bodied. That's, this is the way I've been trained and built up and grown up. And you become very, very self-sustaining, in every element of your life and your career. It's a competitive way.
I think it's understanding as well. I mean, when we interviewed Neil on the podcast with Northern Ireland, he's talking about his PTSD. I had a moment of actual shame on it, because I remember when we came back and him and a couple of other guys were having nightmares and waking people up at night with the nightmares. And our solution of it was we put them all in the same room down at the bottom of the corridor. I think back to that now, and I was ashamed that that's what we did. But we were stupid, young, we didn't know.
I mean, we had, speaking of nightmares, used to walk in and check on the guys, and as the tour went on, I had dreams while I was on tour about violence on tour, because it's your everyday situation. You start to dream about it, like life, and you'd see the guys laying, you'd have to wake a couple of them up because they'd be having severe, heavy nightmares, and shaking themselves. And I'd shake them up sometimes to get them to come around, go and get yourself a cup of tea, mate, you're having a nightmare and stuff. And that's early onset, and it happens on the operations, like you said, in Northern Ireland, Afghanistan. I'm sure every war. It's
not new. My dad was in the army in the early 60s, late 50s, and a lot of the people that he was in the army with were ex-Second World War veterans, and he said that in the barracks, loads of people were having nightmares.
Oh, man. I mean, joining my unit in 2002 after training, you're in with a lot of guys that have been in the 80s, senior full screws, the very different breed of individual in the infantry, the very particular characters, quite scary, some of them, as a young 18-year-old rocking up. But there was particular characters there was a guy called Horse who had Tourette's from being blown up. There was another guy who'd completely lost the plot, and we'd have a battalion parade would be on, and then you'd look over the RSM shoulder onto the garages, and you'd see a guy climb on the roof dressed as the Riddler and stuff, but this guy was completely batch SHIT crazy, and they knew it. Like, eventually he got MD'd, but stuff like that was going on back then, and that was all from people who'd been affected from Northern Ireland.
Well, Adam, thank you very much for your input into the episode. It's been fascinating, and we now come to our favourite part of the podcast. It's the Desert Island Dits, which is the guest choice of book, film, and luxury item. So, Adam, what have you picked for this episode?
I really had to think long and hard about this, and I wrote my originals down for all three, and I've kind of scrapped them and went again. So my book of choice is a book by a gentleman called Napoleon Hill. It's called Think and Grow Rich. And the reason I like this book is Napoleon Hill basically was tasked in the early 1900s to go out and find the greatest innovators in the world, the richest people, and explore their mentality and their individualism and the way they operate and do things, and why they're successful, what the mind of these people. And the one person he spoke to was the guy who basically bought a recipe from a guy for like $500 many years ago, right? And he's got this unit to make this liquid, and he's walking around America, traveling around America, going to shop after shop after shop, trying to sell this thing. people are, place after place is saying no to him, and he persisted and persisted and persisted for years until it became a success. And he never stopped. I think it took him best part of 10 years or so to get it in shops and get it to grow and get it to blow up until it became what it is today. And that's Coca-Cola, So, right. And I think the one thing about that book for me is if you can imagine something, you can achieve it, essentially. And it's something that stuck with me, and it's kind of what I use in my life today, whether, with wanting to make money, with business ideas, with the job, the company that I've got, that we're really going for big, amazing things. We're not holding back on what we're doing. That book's kind of had a really big impact on me, shaping the person that I am today in terms of what I want to achieve for myself and my family. I recommend it to anyone who's thinking about starting a business, for example, and sort of being a bit nervous or edgy about the decisions they make, and be bold. But read that and it'll teach you to be bold.
I'll have to have a look at that. So what's your film choice then, Adam?
Yes, the film choice. Again, I chose Heat initially, but then I went back and thought about it, and Charlie Wilson's War, because it kind of aligns quite well with what we're talking about, especially with the Kabul situation. And there's a saying in that, which is they were glorious, and then they changed the world, and then they effed up the end game. Yeah. And that's super relevant. So
repeated
relevant.
Itself, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it was actually about not long after that time that I chose this film for us, because to bring up now, because of that situation. And as all veterans will know, it has repeated itself, but unfortunately it's repeated itself across multiple situations around the world over the years. So
and history does, unfortunately, go around in a cycle.
It does. And on to the next.
Yeah, your luxury item.
Before you mention this luxury item,
no worries.
We talked about it, didn't we?
Yeah.
Your luxury item really resonated with me. So sorry, mate, I had to jump in and just say that.
I mean, I think it will resonate with a lot of guys, to be honest, because it kind of, what I'm about to say, it kind of casts you back to a certain moment, and it takes you out of where you are for a few seconds, and it's
absolutely
definitely, it were better than any first beer getting out of an operational environment. And it was the Blueies that had perfume sprayed on them. So you get a letter and it had your partner's perfume sprayed on it. So, and it would stay with it embedded in that letter as it travelled out to the desert where you were. Yeah. So the first thing you'd get is your Bluey, and then you'd get a waft of perfume, and you'd just have a little moment to yourself. And that for me was probably my luxury item through my times in the military.
So my choice then is actually Kev gave me this book at Christmas. It's Ernest Shackleton by Ranulph Fiennes. Great book because Ranulph Fiennes has great experience in the Arctic and Antarctic. Man-hauling sledge of 500 pounds. Everybody's probably aware last week they found the actual endurance ship. But this, to me, Ernest Shackleton's a lesson in leadership. He's absolutely amazing leader. He's a bit like an officer in some respects, in that his admin was utter atrocious. And he was a bit of a he's a bit of a ladies' man. He could have done with a platoon sergeant like you, Adam.
Probably.
But when the Endurance got crushed, it was trapped in ice for about 9 months, and then the ship got crushed, and then realised the only way they were going to escape was they had to sail 2 boats which are open to the elements, about a couple hundred miles to a place called Elephant Island. They stayed on there for a few days. Then Shackleton realised only him and 3 others were capable of sailing another 800 miles to South Georgia. So again, they sealed these boats with seal's blood and bits of cloth, and away they went in open boats 800 miles to South Georgia. And then they landed on a beach in South Georgia, and then they had to tab about 40 miles across the mountains and using bits of rope as improvised crampons and all sorts. Absolutely amazing tale of leadership. The most important thing was he didn't lose a single man. So absolutely amazing tale of survival. If you get a chance to read it,
yeah, Ranulph Fiennes as well. I love everything about Ranulph Fiennes.
Oh, he's mental, mate. Have you seen it? You ever been to one of his talks?
No, not yet, but I want to.
Oh, he's well worth it. We had a listener wrote in and said he could get in touch with him. Would you like us to try and get him on the podcast? And we said, yeah, dig out.
Absolutely. I'd listen to that over and over again for sure.
Well, it won't happen, mate, because he basically, in the typical grumpy Ranulph Fiennes fashion, he emailed back saying, if you want to know about me, buy my book.
I bought his book.
Yeah,
yeah, I know, mate. We can't argue with it.
Yeah.
So.
He ran it back on getting a refund.
Yeah. So what's your choice, Kev?
Mine is Pegasus Bridge by Stephen E. Ambrose. And Stephen E. Ambrose was the same bloke that wrote Band of Brothers. So it's obviously based on the events of Pegasus Bridge during the longest day, June the 6th, 1944, D-Day. And it's about the story of the Oxford and Bucks Light Infantry as part of the Airborne Forces who landed gliders, and I'll say landing is a strong word, at the beginning of D-Day to capture a small and vital bridge over the Caen Canal. And this would be the first ground action of D-Day. And there's the dispute going on between the Americans and the British who did the first bit, because the OC's watch stopped, and so did the glider clock at exactly the same time during the landing. And this book gives a great minute-by-minute account of this action. And the author gets across really well. True grittiness of the story, and almost a little bit about the chaos, because I've been to Pegasus Bridge. I went there in the 80s during the D-Day celebrations, and they got markers where the gliders landed or crashed.
Didn't they land about 10 metres from the bridge or something?
47 metres, one of them landed from a sentry position.
Wow.
The Germans were fully manning it, and the idea was to capture this bridge because the bridge would allow the Germans to reinforce troops at the beach end with tanks, but also you need to secure it for the Allies.
I guess they wanted shock of surprise, right? Land right on top of them.
Massively, but they were able to get off the gliders, take the bridge within 10 minutes.
Wow. I remember it being described in a book I read as somebody wrote about it saying it was probably the best bit of airmanship during World War II to get that close.
You imagine trying to land a plywood glider,
not
powered,
not even a
in the middle of night time as well, because obviously D-Day was chosen because it was low light and all the rest of it. You're trying to find a bridge in Normandy with a canal and all the rest of it, and you're trying to put these down on the ground, in a way that the troops then can bail out and then crack on.
Yeah. I think that's why the war was won, because if you think about all the individual characters like that across all of the Allied forces that performed individual elements of what they did to a level and degree of excellence and beyond comprehension.
And it's very daring. But
also it's an argument that's been used with Pegasus bridges. That's what they should have done at Arnhem.
Yes.
They shouldn't have landed 10 miles outside. They should have glided right on the bridges, because
it worked, and it was a tactic that wasn't expected. Now the good thing about, obviously, when I was there in the early 80s, I was there in 83, and I was working at the museum as part of the junior army. Was I spent some time at Pegasus Bridge, and at Pegasus Bridge, Piper Bill Millen arrives every year. Obviously, he's no longer with us, and he pipes over the bridge because some of the Oxford Light Infantry that was still alive at the time used to be at the cafe, and it used to be obviously a part of their annual event. Bill Millen was part of the commando force that landed on the beach and then had to patrol up the road, and they were going to reinforce the Oxford Light Infantry at the bridge until other troops could come in and reinforce that as well. And he piped from the landing craft all the way to the bridge.
What a legend!
He had no weapon, in a kilt, piping. There's a statue of him now. The airborne troops at the bridge couldn't believe they could hear pipes.
What a man!
Over the fighting, unbelievable.
That's why the Germans gave up, mate.
Yeah,
the pipes were blowing their ears out.
If some bloke was coming at me with a skirt on, I'd go as well, mate.
Yeah, all our Scottish listeners like me are going to be up and down.
Yeah. It's only a joke.
Anyway, we can cut that bit out. That's it for another episode. Thank you again, Adam, for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Really appreciate your honesty on that, man.
No problem.
And to you, the listener, for your continued support and suggestions. Please keep them coming in. And our email and social media links are at the bottom of the show notes, as is the postal address. And I am aware that first-class stamps have gone up, but you know what? If you want to get a message to me, that's the only way.
Invest.
You can find us on all the usual suspects, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you download us from your iTunes or Spotify and you like the podcast, it'd be great if you could leave a review, a good review. If it's a bad review, don't bother.
Ram it.
And again, thanks again to Nick Beale for his continuing support and sponsorship to the series and offering the technical support through his company, ISAR. See you next time on The Unconventional Soldier.
The Unconventional Soldier, a military podcast brought to you by two British Army veterans in association with ISAR.com.